Welcome to another episode of The Plunge. And I know we skipped last week because we were all busy watching March Madness. And I know, both Nate and I were really into it and in the games. And they were all exciting. None of us expected the brackets to go this way. So many upsets. I think it's like the highest seed average so far when we heading into this Sweet 16. So let's just start with last week. Any games that kind of stood out to you, Nate, and any teams that surprised you so far?
Well, I could give you the easy answer of Syracuse because obviously I've been watching Syracuse for my whole life and they keep on coming into the tournament and winning as a double-digit seed. But I would have to go with the game that surprised me the most, Oral Roberts in that first round. I mean, I had Ohio State in the national championship. They showed really great parts of their games during their Big Ten tournament run. And I really didn't see a way that they were losing, especially in that kind of weaker region where Baylor was the 1 seed, but the 4 seed went out the first round, and Arkansas is a little kind of an unknown in some ways. Like their offensive scheme is very fast paced, but they aren't really a well-established great team. I mean, they had a good year, but I was really surprised to see Oral Roberts pull that off, but it just goes to show you the talent that's coming up on these mid-majors right now with just tons of parity throughout the NCAA, and all these conferences are putting out good teams who really give the top Power 5 teams a run for their money.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing we notice is that there are 4 Pac-12 teams so far left in the Sweet 16. And so what does this say about like the Big Ten struggles too, and how just the conferences and the NCAA, just the disparity between these?
Well, unfortunately, it's a trend right now you see with football as well, college football. And it's just to discard the Pac-12 almost entirely and pretty much remove them from being a Power 5 conference. I mean, these schools before, you had Arizona ranking as a top team for a lot of years. You had Arizona State, who had a really good run. Oregon, who's consistently been in the tournament, and they've had some really good years with Dylan Brooks and guys like that. And it's funny to me how a year last year, 2019, when the Pac-12 really struggled in the tournament, it's just like an instant, oh, the Pac-12's not that good anymore. And everyone wants to discard the wins that they've had this season. I mean, I think UCLA had some big wins over some Big Ten teams. And it was clear to me that there was talent in the Pac-12 this year. You have Mobley, who's a top 3 pick, most likely. You have Chris Duarte on Oregon, who's just been so consistent all year, and he'll be in that lottery field too. And then you have other teams like Colorado who really had a great first game against Georgetown and struggle against the length of FSU in the second round. But and then of course Oregon State, who's been on this crazy run lately. It goes to show you that the competition in the Pac-12 really isn't much worse off than in the Big Ten or in the Big East or the ACC. I mean, clearly these teams come out here and they're battle tested. If you've watched any of UCLA's games they played 3 games already because they had to play Michigan State in that play-in game. Like Juzang and Hawkes are both elite scorers who can score against any type of defense. They've been playing really well as a team together. And these teams, yeah, sure, UCLA lost 4 in a row against teams who are unranked, but that's just because of this bias that exists towards the East Coast conferences and the South conferences, and people continue to ignore the West either because it's on too late for them to watch, or they just don't think that the same talent exists on the West Coast than the East Coast and up in that ACC or Big Ten region.
Yeah, for sure. I guess for me, one team that surprised me the most was probably Iowa. I had them, I think, in the Final Four in my bracket just because they had Luka Garza. But like we said about the Pac-12, like they lose to Oregon by 15, and so it really just shows the strength of some Pac-12 teams in this tournament. And so looking forward to this weekend. So you got the Sweet 16. Gonzaga's kind of breezing through. Any kind of particular matchup that you're looking for? I think for me, Loyola Chicago is going to be fun to watch against Oregon State. That's going to be a pretty good one. But what about you? Like, what are some key matchups that you're looking forward to this week?
Yeah, if I have 3 games that I look forward to the most, one, Syracuse for personal reasons, not because it's going to be the best game. Michigan and Florida State, just because Florida State is really talented. They're always a super long team, but this year they have talent on the outside, and they've been shooting close to 37-38% from 3 this whole season, with Scotty Barnes leading the way. They're just a very dynamic team. They have a lot of guys who can step up. Leonard Hamilton's been to the Sweet 16. I think it was like 4 of the last 8 years or something like that. And he's just a really solid coach, and that team has got a lot of leadership, and they've got a lot of talent there, including, like I said, Scotty Barnes. And Michigan comes in with being one of the best teams all year. Unfortunately, they're missing Isaiah Livers, but they've had guys step up. Eli Brooks stepped up last game, and Franz Wagner, he's played well all year. They're a team who has been resilient and has really picked up the slack when they've had players missing. And then the last game that I'm interested in would be USC Oregon, just because Oregon had such a great showing against Iowa last game. Chris Duarte, he's been awesome. And then you go up against the Mobley brothers and just the talent that exists in that USC team. And it's going to be a tough face-off between teams who know each other well. So I'm really excited for that one as well.
Yeah, USC actually is really fun to watch. Like, I watched their game in the second round. Like, the Mobley brothers are so good. Even Gonzaga too. Like, I watched their game, I think it was Monday or Tuesday when they were playing Oklahoma. It's like, man, these guys can really play good basketball. And I think Corey Kispert is so fun to watch. And even Drew Timme, like, his post-up game is as old school as it can be. It just shows that it's still so effective today in modern age basketball. So
the thing with Gonzaga is, like, you watch them, they were kind of running close to Oklahoma at the start of the game because Reeves was really hot for Oklahoma.
Yeah, they got really hot.
They have so many ways to beat you. Like, yeah, sure, you have a good first half, and they're having a poor shooting first half. Kispert can't find the bucket, and Suggs is turning it over. But then they just go to Timme, and he beats you down low, and you're tied at the half after having one of the best halves we've had for Oklahoma this year. And so it's just, that's the thing that is consistent among most champions, is they have more than one way to beat you. And that's really clear with this Gonzaga team so far.
Yeah, even implementing that 3-quarter press on Oklahoma that game, like that, like as far as those presses go, like they executed pretty well. And so so let's move on to the NBA. We just came off an insane trade deadline. I feel like the day before we were like, oh my goodness, there's no trades going on. And then, like, the morning of the deadline, 3 hours before the 12 o'clock Pacific time deadline, there's like a bunch of trades. So let's start with all the 3 major NBA trades. So let's start with Victor Oladipo to the Heat. So he got traded to the Heat for Avery Bradley, Kelly Olynyk, and a couple of pick swaps. We both said this before, that this is such a steal for Miami because they did not give away Kendrick Nunn, Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson, any of their guards, which we thought would be part of this deal. So what does Oladipo help for the Heat for their run this season?
I find it interesting that people talk about Oladipo not having the mentality to play for the Miami Heat, considering that when he took the Cavaliers to 7 games during LeBron's last year in Cleveland, he texted his trainer at the press conference after the game saying, let's get in tomorrow and put some work in the morning. Like, Victor Oladipo has gotten this bad rap because he was out for a year. And that's basically the only bad thing that people have to say about him. Sure, he's been put in this crappy situation in Houston. And sure, Indiana had kind of moved on from him after he was injured just because they had got Sabonis and all of a sudden he started playing at all-star level when no one really ever thought he had that potential. And then they signed Brogdon in the offseason and the ball handling duties kind of are taken away from Oladipo because of that. But Oladipo for sure has the mentality to play for a team like Miami. He loves to work hard. I do have questions about his scoring right now because it does seem like a little bit more volume than efficiency. He just had a lot of shots available to him during that 20-game losing streak for Houston. And I think he can reclaim it. If you look at Indiana this year, they were much better when they had Oladipo on their team. And I mean, now they have Karis LeVert to replace him, who's been really good for them so far through his first 5 games this season. But Oladipo is still a winning player. He's still a guy who 2.5 years ago was a top 15 player in the league. And I feel that a new culture and a place where he is really a centerpiece for them moving forward, because I think he will be, just because he fits a role where Kendrick Nunn doesn't quite have the ball handling skills and the creating skills of an Oladipo, and Tyler Hero doesn't quite have the consistency yet to be a player who's the level of Oladipo. So he brings a lot to Miami this year and for this playoff run. I don't know if they re-sign him just because of all the depth that they have in the wing position moving forward. But it's a good trade, and it will benefit this team in this season and the playoffs ahead.
Yeah, I think for the Heat, like, you kind of need that jumpstart player to kind of ignite your offense. And I think, yeah, like you said about LeVert, when you watch Indiana now with LeVert, I think they won 3 or 4 straight games or something. And I think he scored like 28 points in his last game, or 30, I think even. But like, and Indiana was struggling before LeVert came back, and so because they don't really have that kind of firepower player who can go get their shot whenever they want, because they lost T.J. Warren, and yeah, of course you trade away Oladipo. And, you know, when LeVert came back to the team, and it, of course, it took him a few games to kind of get back into shape. But when you watch them play, like, they just give the ball to him, run the 2-man game with Sabonis, like, there you go. That's your offense. And so I think for the Heat, they've lost 5 straight so far. And like you said, Hero and Nunn and Robinson, they're not as consistent guards. Maybe Robinson, but even then, he's hot and cold sometimes. But, yeah, like Hero, Nunn, if you're the primary guards for the Heat, like, you got to have some level of consistency, especially when Goran Dragic probably does not want to play 30 minutes every game to try to win a regular season game every time, right? So, like, if for the Heat, you got to rest Dragic a little bit more, given, like, his injury history in the playoffs last year. And so, yeah, I think Oladipo will give a really great jumpstart to the offense of this team. Adds a lot of athleticism. Yeah, like you said, question a little bit of his shooting, but, you know, you have players like Robinson who can kind of make it up for him and all that. So I'm just surprised how the Heat just stole him off, like, Olynyk and Bradley, who don't play that much or aren't even big impact players for the Heat.
Yeah, it's not the most sensible trade fit-wise for Miami, just because they do have a lot of options at that 2/3 position where Oladipo plays. But for that value, like, it would be really stupid not to take a chance, because you just brought in Bjelica from Sacramento, who essentially plays the same role as Kelly Olynyk, and Avery Bradley has, like, really been a non-factor this year. I mean, he was really good because of the role he played for the Lakers before the bubble, and he decided to not play in the bubble, but it was too good to not take if you're Miami, despite fit or despite despite whose playing time you're going to affect with this trade, you can't deny it when it costs you pennies on the dollar.
Yeah, and of course, the caliber of a player Oladipo is, like, he's that good to not pass on. So, yeah, the Heat are pretty stacked on guards, but I think they're able to do that in their system. Even it'll be good for their zone as well when they play it. I don't even know if they played it that much this season, but anyways, yeah, great winners, the Miami Heat. They won this trade deadline by getting Oladipo for basically not that much. So, Aaron Gordon, the next big name that was traded this deadline. I think he's a bit of an overrated player. I don't really understand why he was kind of the number one trade prospect this season. Just because, I don't know, he just seems a bit overhyped to me because of his athleticism. I don't think he really gives that much in terms of, like, having the ball and all that. And, like, sure, he's been shooting a bit better this season, but before this season, I think he's been shooting around, like, the low 30s from three. But anyways, they traded Aaron Gordon, Gary Clark to the Nuggets for Gary Harris and RJ Hampton, another first-round pick. So, what does Aaron Gordon bring to the Nuggets, especially in their system with Jokic at kind of the centerpiece of their offense?
Well, what Denver lost in free agency was massive. It was bigger than they thought, because Jeremy Grant was not only at times their third best player in that playoff run last year, at times he was their second best player, guarding LeBron, guarding Kawhi, Paul George. He just brought so much to the team that they didn't really see throughout the entire regular season, but it was clearly evident that he was in for a bigger role moving forward, whether he stayed with the Nuggets or whether he moved on. And then he moves on, and you just see what he's done in Detroit. I mean, he's been efficient. He's been a great defender. He's had that team be competitive in a lot of games this year. They didn't win a ton, or they haven't won a ton, but he is just a competitor. And Denver lost a huge amount losing him, and they try and replace it with Aaron Gordon, which is interesting because it's a bigger body. Aaron Gordon matches up physically better with LeBron and Kawhi than Jeremy Grant did. I think your defensive potential in the NBA can't really be quantified when you play for a team that's a non-contender every year, just because there's no reason for you to put your all into defense when your team is not going to go anywhere. And guys will argue that, or they'll say that, oh, I'm giving it my all on the defensive end. But you can see a prime example this year with Wiggins and Golden State compared to Minnesota. He's been a much better defender this year, and you could tell that he had the ability to be a good defender because of his wingspan, his athleticism. And so when I look at Aaron Gordon, he has the wingspan, he has the athleticism, he has a muscular athletic build to be an elite defender. And so this trade will be one if Denver can unlock that defensive potential, because he brings a reasonable offensive profile where having him on the floor is never going to hurt your team. It might just not help them a ton. But his defensive potential is kind of where they are reaching for this trade a little bit. I mean, they didn't give up too many assets. Harris was a good player for quite a while, but he's dropped off considerably over the past while. And I think Hampton was in the late 20s this year. And then their first round pick in 2025, if they stay successful and they keep that young core together, is going to be in the high 20s as well.
Yeah. And I think the one loss of this trade for them is that you have to play, now that Gary Harris is gone, you have to play Will Barton more at the two. And I don't know if that's the ideal situation defensively, but like, you have to thin out the minutes for your guards, and even Michael Porter Jr. as well, which I don't mind for the Nuggets, but like, yeah, I don't know. Your perimeter defense is looking a little bit more thinner now with Harris out of the rotation. And I think, I guess the thing about Gordon, I guess there's a lot of speculation about his defense and all. Just because he hasn't played in like you said, like a competitive team in his career yet. So I think it's hard to make judgments on whether he'll actually try on defense. But of course, his physical profile kind of speaks to his capabilities for sure. But only time will tell. But yeah, it's a great trade for the Nuggets. It certainly puts them a bit higher in the rankings for the Western Conference, especially when the Lakers are going to plummet a little bit. So moving on to the Eastern Conference, Nikola Vucevic is finally freed from Orlando. But I don't know if free is the right word when you're going from Orlando to Chicago. But, I mean, it's a good move for Chicago because it pairs Zach LaVine with a reasonable center who has experience, who's actually capable of doing almost everything that he asks the center to do. Like he's probably like a poor man's Jokic in a way. But yeah, I'm happy for Vucevic, but it clearly shows that the Bulls are trying to contend for a good playoff seed this year, which is good because they haven't really been in conversations the past few years. So Vucevic and Amino go to the Bulls. They give away Otto Porter, Wendell Carter to the Magic, and Carter hasn't really played that much, especially the past couple of days since he's been benched a bit more. So what does this do for the Bulls, and will this actually help them this season?
Yeah, when you add an impact player like Vucevic, it helps. He's not he's not good stats, bad team player. He brings a lot to the team, maybe not defensively, but offensively, and he clearly is a guy that people like to play with because you see all his teammates talking about him in post-game interviews, and they just love him just because he brings that consistency of 25 and 10 a night, as well as just a good attitude to the team. And the Chicago Bulls so far this year have been so reliant on Zach LaVine having 30 points if they want to have a chance in the game. And that has really doomed them a lot this season to sitting around 500, despite having a lot of talent on the team with Kobe White, Lauri Markkanen, who is an okay player. He has good potential still. And then you have guys like Zach LaVine, obviously. You had Wendell Carter Jr. there. You have a good young core still. So adding Vucevic to that, hopefully it will make them a more consistent team night in, night out. I think it should. It will be good for Kobe White to have a guy who is a reasonable and sound pick and roll partner. And Kobe White's been really good at times this year too. And so I'm excited to see what Zach LaVine, Kobe White, and Vucevic can do together. I don't see this as making them a contender, but it should get them a playoff spot in the East this year, or a play-in game probably, because they're probably going to land in that 7 to 10 region regardless. But yeah, it's a move that signals that Chicago finally wants to move out of the mediocrity and missing the playoffs. I think they miss the playoffs every year since they traded Jimmy Butler. So yeah, I'm excited for them. I'm excited for Zach LaVine to have a teammate who he can trust and who he can play with. And it takes a lot of pressure off him to be that 30 points a night that he has to be right now.
Yeah. And I think even like you projected them as a 7 to 10 range is a bit probably like conservative, just because the Eastern Conference is so bad. Like from 4 to the 12th seed or 11th seed, like I think there's only about like 2 or 3 games in between the 4th and the 11th seed. And the Charlotte Hornets are 4th place in the Eastern Conference. So like, and the Knicks are right behind them, right? And so I think you'd expect the Hornets and the Knicks to kind of drop off a little bit. And I think that opens the door for the Bulls to kind of get into that 6, 7, 8, 9 seeds. But yeah, I think LaVine really needs a good center. And I think they're trying to make the Wendell Carter Jr. thing work, but not really. And I think adding Vucevic to your team kind of gives opportunity for Lauri Markkanen to not always be that 5, and to kind of stretch the floor for the team and just chill in the corner and wait for kick-out passes. just because he isn't really a good post-up guy anyways. But yeah, I don't know. The future of this Bulls franchise is really interesting because I think they're saying that they're probably not going to keep Markkanen if Vucevic is going to stay there for long. I don't know. But what are your thoughts on just their team right now as well?
Yeah, like I said, I think they're a talented team. I think Wendell Carter Jr. was a really talented player too. The fit is a little dysfunctional with Markkanen kind of playing the 5 and Carter kind of playing the 4, but the games are like they're opposite in some ways, where Markkanen more fills that 4 role correctly, and Wendell Carter Jr. kind of fits that undersized Bam Adebayo-ish center, where he is athletic and a good defender, but his 3-pointer is not great, and he has more skills around the basket than he has on the perimeter. So yeah, I'm excited for this team, but I did want to talk about this from an Orlando perspective.
Yeah, I was going to ask that too.
I really like this move for Orlando just because, well, Otto Porter, he's a good player. He's overpaid for sure. I don't think that's a big get in this deal. Wendell Carter Jr. is a good player still, and I think people want to forget that, but he's been locked in kind of this dysfunctional Bulls team where they don't really know their role. They've had a good coach for 40 games now. Before that, they had like Jim Boylan and whoever came before that. Like, yeah. I mean, it's been a long time since he's been coached by a actually good coach. And I think Orlando, do they still have Steve Clifford?
Yeah, they still have Clifford, I think.
Clifford's been a pretty good big man coach throughout his career. And I think that he can help Wendell Carter have a little bit more freedom in that post area. It won't be so packed. He won't be so relegated to kind of a secondary role on the team. He'll be one of the focal points. And it also opens the door for a guy who I've liked for a long time, who I thought was really one of the best draft picks in the draft at the time, but he's done nothing in the NBA so far. I think Mo Bamba will really, he'll really get a chance. He'll get a chance. I mean, he's been stuck behind Vucevic his whole career so far. His athletic profile is scary. Like, he's got a 7'8" wingspan. He's 7'2". He used to be able to shoot the 3 at Texas. Like, he has a lot of potential still. I think a lot of teams would be willing to take a flyer on him still. It just comes down to confidence for him because, yeah, one, he needs to get an NBA-ready body so he can actually play against grown men. But two, a lot of being a good player in the NBA comes down to confidence, and he'll be fed tons of minutes, and hopefully he can regain some confidence and be a building block with Jonathan Isaac and Markelle Fultz moving forward. Yeah,
and there's a problem with Mo Bamba's ceiling when Kem Birch is starting over him too. When I think Kem Birch was the main backup to Vooch, so I think even then, like, when you think about that, it's like, yeah, Mo Bamba is not really ready for the NBA. But when you look at the future of this Magic team, like, it's like you look at their guards, like Cole Anthony, Markelle Fultz, and they just get RJ Hampton. They're 3 athletic guards who can push the ball, and you pair that with Jonathan Isaac, who will come back from his surgery. Hopefully he'll be just as athletic as he was before his injury. But like, you look at the core of this team, and you have some really good athletic guards and complemented with some good wings. And even Gary Harris too, he's a pretty young guy too. So I think this team is looking really, really nice so far, looking into the future.
Yeah, I like what they have going. Jonathan Isaac is like Giannis without really an offensive game. But his defensive numbers were scary when he was playing. Like, he was averaging over 2.5 steals and 2.5 blocks at the start of the 2019-2020 season. I really like him, and I think Orlando's maybe a year or a couple of years away from having a reasonable team again. And I think they have a higher ceiling with this squad than they did with what they just traded away.
Yeah, for sure. And then we got to give our condolences to where condolences are due. Vucevic, Gordon, and Fournier all left, and that leaves one man left alone on an island on this with this team, and that's Terrence Ross. We like you look at his Twitter and it's like, oh my goodness, like when you're not laughing, you're crying.
Yeah, I think he posted that I'm the captain now on Twitter.
Kind of like an Al Horford situation.
Yeah,
little bit younger, but still the same thing.
He's definitely gonna be chucking some shots the rest of the season.
For sure. So moving on, let's just do some quick hitters. I guess we can just alternate between these trades. So I can start. Norman Powell to the Blazers for Trent and Hood. What are your thoughts for both of these teams?
Yeah, you're not gonna like my analysis of this one.
Yeah, probably
not. I just think it's redundant. Like, you basically traded away a kind of shorter small forward for another shorter small forward who might be worse defensively, better offensively. But is offense really what you need from a shooting guard in Portland? Is that your number one issue? Clearly it's not. Clearly it's still defense. And I think that this trade was meaningless. It didn't hurt them, but it was pretty meaningless.
Yeah, I think at this point the Blazers, they're just like, screw it. We don't care about defense. Like at this point, there's really no good players in the markets for us to acquire. We accept the fact that Dame and CJ are horrible defensively, and we're just gonna let that slide and just hope that our offense kind of carries us. But I will say one thing about the Powell trade is that Norman Powell offers a bit more ball handling than Gary Trent, and the Blazers were kind of needing that for their bench, because Simons is still really young, and he's had some pretty bad turnovers this season, and Gary Trent can't really dribble the ball that well. So Norman Powell actually offers a lot of some good ball handling for sure, and his ability to get to the rim too. Like when you look at the Blazers team, I think Dame and CJ are probably the only ones who get to the rim. Like Robert Covington and Derek Jones Jr., they don't have the dribbling skills and even just the profile to get to the rim off the dribble. And so I think when you add Powell into the mix, he's able to actually get to the hoop and, draw a foul or draw some double teams. And so I think, and he's not too bad of a shooter, but I would still prefer Trent as a better shooter. But even then, it's I'm pretty excited to have Powell on our team for the Blazers, but at the same time, it's like, what do we give up to get him? And of course, there's like a lot of contract reasons as well, because Trent's on his final year and he's gonna be pretty coveted next year for a big contract for a team. Same as Powell too, but yeah, I don't know. I guess Powell's a great kind of energy guy too. He can start, come off the bench, whatever. But yeah, I think the main takeaway from this trade is just his ball handling. So moving on.
Yeah, it just doesn't solve all the issues that the team has, and I don't see them really making any significant changes to how they play, just incorporating him. But moving on from Norman Powell to a trade I think is a really big deal. Rondo gets sent to the Clippers for Lou Williams, and I think there may have been a second round pick or a first round pick included there
something
too.
like that. Yeah.
I'm not positive, but Lou Williams finally leaves the Clippers and they gain Rajon Rondo.
Yeah, that's a great trade for the Clippers. I think there's not. Yeah, I think you finally get that point guard that you really needed, who has the offensive IQ, because Rondo is probably one of the smartest point guards out there. And yeah, even just his profile in the playoffs, like he really adds that aspect of just the experience, the veteranship, and even just taking the ball out of Kawhi and PG's hands when they need to. Because when you look at their other guards like Reggie Jackson, Patrick Beverley, and then Lou Williams, like they don't have any playmaking abilities. They don't do anything from that standpoint. And even Lou Williams, he was so bad. Like this season, like he barely made any difference for this team. And I don't know if that's age. I don't know if that's just he's just sick of being on the Clippers, or just I don't know. But it's a great change of scenery in general for the Clippers, just because they just have that monkey on their back of like they can't get past the second round, and just because of Rondo's profile in the playoffs, like now you got a chance. It has a lot of playmaking, it kind of opens up your offense even a bit more too for the Clippers.
Yeah, you get rid of Lou Williams, who clearly did not jive with the rest of the team last year, and you bring on Rondo, who last we saw him in the playoffs was the third best player on the championship Lakers. So who's to say he can't be the third best player on the championship Clippers?
Yeah, and one more thing, now you got playoff Rondo and playoff P on the same team. I told you this before. I think they're just going to cancel each other out, so it's not going to do much in the playoffs.
Yeah, they just better hope they don't run into Joe Ingles, because he is.
Oh no!
Last we've seen when Utah played Oklahoma City, Joe Ingles was fathering Paul George. So that is their kryptonite.
Yes, for sure. Okay, moving on. We predicted this upcoming trade, by the way. JJ Redick. I think we said this in a couple pods ago. He goes to the Mavs, him and Nico Melli for James Johnson, Wes Iwundu, and a 2021 first rounder. So what does this do for the Mavs offense?
Yeah, I'll keep this one quick. JJ Redick, great shooter. Kind of fills that Seth Curry role of last year. Not as good of a ball handler, but veteran shooter who will bring a lot to a Mavs team in both leadership and on the court play. They get rid of James Johnson, who is kind of a failed experiment. Wes Iwundu, who is Wes Iwundu. I mean, it's not a big loss. You could sign a guy of his caliber on the waiver wire. And then your 2021 first round pick. I mean, you're expecting it to not be a very high pick if you're the Mavs, because you would like to be up in the up higher in the standings. So helps the Mavs, and the Pelicans get a reasonable return and more playing time for Alexander Walker. So
yeah, I think he'll get the ball off Tim Hardaway Jr.'s hands a little bit more, because he takes like 90 shots a game. But yeah, I think that it adds for sure a lot of good depth in your guard rotation too. So
yeah, I think it'll help them moving forward, and will definitely help them in the playoffs. Moving on, the last trade that we have to talk about, the Celtics send Daniel Tice to the Bulls, and they get Fournier from the Magic. How do you feel about this one?
Well, I think it's time for Time Lord to step in to that big man role. I think he might start, but I think he's probably going to come off the bench, just because of Tristan Thompson. But I think Robert Williams will really get more playing time for sure, and I think that's really exciting for the Celtics. When it comes to Fournier, though, he adds that extra ball handling ability and takes the ball off of Tatum and Brown's hands a bit more. But I don't know. It's a good trade for the Celtics, just because they only gave up, I think, 2 second rounders and Jeff Teague for Fournier. He can create his shot off the dribble, off the pick and roll when Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum haven't been shooting well. And there have been so many nights where Tatum and Brown are just like 3 for 15 from the field or something like that. And it's good to have Fournier to kind of be that next guy up, to go get a bucket, just because Kemba Walker hasn't really been the same. He's been inconsistent as well. And Marcus Smart just came off an injury. But yeah, now the Celtics are very guard heavy. I don't know what that does for their defense, but I don't know. It's like a kind of a meh kind of trade for the Celtics.
Yeah, I like Fournier. I mean, he's almost 50, 40, 90 this year, and they could really use some shooting. I like his fit there. I think that he is a veteran guy who is looking to win a championship, and he'll bring that attitude to the Celtics, hopefully. As for losing Daniel Tice, it is what it is. He brought some mental toughness to that team for sure. He also stood in the way of a better player in Robert Williams getting more time. And so it's a loss in some aspects, but hopefully Time Lord can kind of fill that gap, just because he's been so effective in his limited minutes, and hopefully he can put that into a full game where he's playing 30 minutes and be as effective on the floor. So yeah. I think Fournier was a good pickup. Sending out Tice has its downsides, but also is probably about time for them to move on.
Yeah. One thing to watch out for is Fournier's injury history. But I think they'll be fine though. So I guess the last thing about for this pod before we end it is just kind of the outlook, the big picture of the NBA now after the trade deadline. And I guess do you see any major changes in the standings? And of course there's some obvious ones like the Hornets will drop because LaMelo Ball is out, and then the Lakers will drop a bit because of LeBron and AD being out. So other than those two obvious changes, do you see any major changes up or down in the standings from these trades this past week?
Not major changes. I hope that OKC finally starts to bottom out a little bit, because I would really like Cade Cunningham on their team. But apart from that, you'll see the Bulls kind of work their way up a bit. The Heat will get back into that 4-5 seed. The Pacers should make it back into the playoff picture with LeVert there again. And then, of course, I think Boston will figure it out and be a better team in the second half. In the Western Conference, the Lakers might drop to 5th. I think they will be able to win some games. AD should be back soon. Not much changes in terms of the playoff picture there. Still going to be some combination of Utah, Phoenix, the Clippers in the first 3, most likely, and then Lakers and Blazers and Mavs spread out and through Nuggets. There. Yeah, the Nuggets as well. They'll probably finish 4th. I could see them having a first round matchup with the Lakers, but not too much movement. I think you're pretty much seeing the teams round out who will be playoff teams. I think the West is pretty set. Maybe the Warriors move up a couple, and then the East, a couple teams, New York, Charlotte might drop, and then the Heat, the Celtics, and Chicago should rise a bit.
Yeah, I think one thing to look out in the West is probably the 7 to 10 seeding, because I think even like the 8 and 9 seeding, because if you're 8th, you only have to win once or something like that, and the 9 and 10 seeds have to win twice. So I think it'll be very interesting to see which teams fill out those 7 to 10 seeds, because it really depends on which team's able to win just one game or they have to win 2 games. So I think that's going to be very interesting to see, just because the Mavs, the Spurs, Grizzlies are still in it, surprisingly, and the Warriors. I don't know if the Kings and Pelicans really have enough to make it there. I think the Kings are tanking for sure. I don't know about the Pelicans, but yeah, it's it's looking pretty grim down there, but I don't know. You never know.
Yeah, I think it'll just be the teams who are battling 10 and up right now, aside from maybe the Wizards. They're the only other team I hold out hope for. But teams 10 and up right now, that is pretty much your playoff picture moving forward in each conference.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe the Raptors, just because they kept Kyle Lowry, but I don't know. I think... yeah, it's not the competition in the East is pretty loaded. So that does it for this week's of the pod. We'll be very interested to see how these trades pan out for these teams, and also March Madness. I'm excited. I'm totally gonna watch the Syracuse game with you, Nate.
Let's go, Qs.
It's gonna be fun. I'm also gonna be cheering for my Oregon teams as well. I'm surprised they both made it. But yeah, that's it for our pod, and we'll see you in our next episode.